Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Welcome, everybody. It's good to be together for another episode here. Today's title is Power to Make Others Happy, Scrooge's Dance as a Feast for the Ages. And I have to say this is sprung directly from our reading A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens out loud as a family in the days after Christmas, as we've done a number of times in the past. And I realized this year it is simply my absolute favorite thing to read out loud.
Yeah, and actually it was really interesting to hear the children's reactions this year. They both said that two of our children, our two youngest, said it's their favorite book ever. And your mom was with us too for part of the reading, and she was also moved, and she's heard us read it before. So it seems like every time we read it, we're moved anew and more. How powerful this book is, and just joyful and meaningful, and wow, it was really fun.
So I think our idea here was, we said to ourselves, particularly after reading this one section from the Christmas past, we just thought we just have to share this. We're going to read it out loud, these couple pages, and we're going to share some comments. There's so many things. So this is not going to be a reflection on the entire Christmas Carol, which is solely worth doing, a conversation we can have for another time, or even just on other little sections of it, such as a great section that's worth reading out loud is just the Christmas dinner at the Cratchits.
Yeah,
is a great selection.
As a point of reference, it took us 3 sittings to finish it this year.
This is the full text, in other words. It's about 80 pages.
Exactly.
There's a lot of abridged versions out there, which can be okay, but if we cannot recommend enough, if you can find the time, make the time, read A Christmas Carol, the full version. You'll know it's the full version if it's about 80 pages.
Yeah. And you actually have the fun habit of writing in the cover of the book when we read it last. And so it was interesting for us to see that last year we read some excerpts. We didn't actually read the whole Christmas Carol. 2 years ago, we read the whole thing. And the year before that, we read some excerpts. So it's just kind of unintentionally, we seem to have gotten into a little bit of a rhythm, but we were so delighted to read the whole thing this year.
I just think we have to do the whole thing every year. But in any case, I want to just give a teaser. I mean, why the title, Power to Make Others Happy, Scrooge's Dance is a Feast for the Ages. Well, we're going to read you about Scrooge's dance. Really, it should be called Fezziwig's dance. Mm-hmm. And if you don't remember the character Fezziwig, you will in a moment, I hope. But I want to say that when we came to the end of these several pages, when we were reading out loud, Sofia, after these particular important lines, said, I think everybody in authority should read and reflect upon that. And that's what made us think, okay, let's read this aloud and reflect upon it together.
So maybe before we start, can you just give a little synopsis? First of all, it might have been a while since people have read A Christmas Carol, and the details might be fuzzy, or there may be some who are listening who've never read it, although the general outlines of the story, I'm sure, are familiar. But why don't you just give us a little synopsis so we have a sense of where...
Or in any case, maybe not in the synopsis of the whole thing, but just what leads up to where we are now.
Yep, so that we have a context for Fezziwig.
So everyone knows, I think, Ebenezer Scrooge, a miserly old man. He, after we see his miserliness and his interactions with his clerk, the famous Bob Cratchit, who's, of course, the father of Tiny Tim, the beloved character, he comes home that evening, and the ghost of his old partner appears to him and tells him he's going to kind of receive a special gift of 3 different spirits, ghosts, appearing to him. And it's going to be the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and then the ghost of Christmas future. And so that leads to the different, what they call here, staves or chapters of the story, this kind of slightly longer, quote, short story. And the first one and which is what all we're really going to talk about here, is the Ghost of Christmas Past. Mm-hmm. So the Ghost of Christmas Past comes and brings Scrooge and just kind of looks in on Christmases in Scrooge's earlier life. And this, of course, is to start to prepare him for a deeper message that he needs to see about life and what's important or not. And so one of the key things, a couple of things that he looks at first is him as a schoolboy, and those are significant, and we're not going to go into that. But then comes him as a very young man when he was an apprentice, and he was apprentice to a man named Fezziwig.
So he's a clerk. He's basically what Bob Cratchit is now. He's a clerk to or apprentice to Fezziwig. So he's learning the craft just as Bob Cratchit is in relation to him right now.
Yeah, although I don't know if Cratchit would be called an apprentice because he's never going to.
But he works just under him. He works under Fezziwig. So yes.
And there's this is going to be, as we'll see, it's Christmas Eve, and so there's going to be a special dance, and this is what Scrooge, with the Ghost of Christmas Past, is going to look in on.
Can I just also mention that, of course, in the beginning with Bob Cratchit and the other clerks are freezing to death doing their work in Scrooge's offices because Scrooge doesn't want to put more coal on the fire because it costs money. And, he keeps them as late as possible and demands that they're there on time. And so the atmosphere of Scrooge's offices are very dismal and really beat down the people who work for Scrooge. And so this is kind of, Fezziwig's office is kind of a direct contrast to how Scrooge is running his office in the present day. So this is Christmas Eve. Fezziwig and the clerks and apprentices have clearly been working all day, but the Christmas festivities start on Christmas Eve at the end of the workday. So and everything in this scene takes place in those very offices where young Scrooge and other apprentices do their work during the rest of the year.
Which is a warehouse. I honestly don't recall exactly what Fezziwig's line of business is, but
I'm not sure that it actually says.
Doesn't. Yeah. We don't need to know. There's many more important things that we can notice herein. So here we go. Couple pages. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it, said Scrooge. Was I apprenticed here? They went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig, bless his heart. It's Fezziwig, alive again." Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho, there, Ebenezer, Dick." Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. "Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick. Dear, dear." "Yo-ho, my boys," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up," cried old Fezziwig, with a sharp clap of his hands, "before a man can say Jack Robinson. You wouldn't believe how those two fellows went at it." Pardon me. They charged into the street with the shutters. 1, 2, 3, had 'em up in their places. 4, 5, 6, barred 'em and pinned 'em. 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. "Hilly-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. "Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick! Chirrup, Ebenezer!" Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore. The floor was swept and watered. The lamps were trimmed. Fuel was heaped upon the fire. And the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master. Trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door but one, was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place. New top couple starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter, especially provided for that purpose.
Mhm.
But scorning rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home, exhausted on a shutter. And he were a brand new man, resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog, mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told it to him, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple, too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, hold hands with your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs, and came upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. Meaning the Scrooge that's looking on. His heart and soul were in the scene and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small?" echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the two apprentices who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig. And when he had done so, the spirit said, "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that it deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously, like his former, not his later self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." Scrooge felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What's the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge, "no. But I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all." It goes on to the next. They have another visitation to make in looking at Christmas past. Maybe just before we start to discuss so much there, in those final lines, just to be clear, that in the art of what the ghost of Christmas past, when he says to Scrooge, "A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." Surely, and tell me if you think otherwise too, the ghost is trying to provoke him. He's trying to bring something. The ghost doesn't think it's a small matter, but that elicited immediately. Scrooge says, "Small?" echoed Scrooge. Then the spirit says, listen to what those young men are saying. The young men, namely the young Scrooge and his friend Dick, and they're speaking such high praise of Fezziwig. And then to keep provoking him, the spirit says, "Why is it not," meaning why is it not small? Because the last word exchanged between them was small. So the spirit says, "Is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?"
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just heated by the remark. Scrooge comes forth with this amazing reflection on what Fezziwig had done for all those people, not spending very much, but doing something very significant. Does that sound right to you? That I'm reading that rightly?
Yes, and I think all the ghost is definitely adverting back to Scrooge's interaction with the man who comes to collect funds for the poor at the beginning, where he says, "What? What? I'm not going to spend my money on that. Why do they need something? So he's kind of makes little of the fact that a few farthings here or there could really make someone happy or joyful. So it's really a beautiful moment where Scrooge is commenting on himself without realizing it.
Right. So shall we then focus in on and just go right to this again? This you and I particularly as dancers and leaders of kind of traditional group dancing, contra dancing, English country waltzing, really much can appreciate the astounding fun of a group here in couples that you're rotating and dancing. You get a chance to dance with everybody, and in who the lead couple is significant, and then kind of culminating in Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig coming in. It's just wonderful images.
Yeah, I think the dance that they're referring to at the end, that the fiddler almost seems to kind of do it on purpose when Fezziwig and his wife take the lead, it must be something like the Virginia reels that we do, which is when the line is long, it is so exhausting because you are sashaying all the way to one end and all the way back. And so them being the lead couple, and it says all those other couples were not to be trifled with. That
Right.
means people were going fast and they were keeping a pace, and there was a lot of couples, so that you have a long way to go.
To go through.
And Fezziwig and his wife, who are not young, keep up marvelously. Just his energy is fueled by his charity.
Indeed. I mean, throughout, might we just have, and I hope people have occasion to go back, of course, and read this themselves or listen again, even just to this recounting here. But the portrait that's given of a man that we're told very little about otherwise, but you see how he keeps Christmas and how he treats those that are under him. And it's, of course, worth remembering. I think this is clearly why you were inspired to say, well, anyone in authority ought to think of this. I mean, going back long before the medieval system, the whole thing of apprentices, the kind of master of an apprentice is a kind of father figure and has a very significant role in the life of those who are his apprentices. And of course, remember when Scrooge first saw, oh my goodness, there's Fezziwig alive again, dear Fezziwig. So clearly,
even the sight of him inspires this joy in Scrooge.
No, of course, it just struck me. I mean, this does remind us that there's no exercise of authority that will ever assure that somebody turns out a certain way. I mean, isn't it remarkable that he had this wonderful, wonderful influence in his life? Of course, the beautiful thing is this. I almost want to say you could say in reading the story, I almost want to say that is clearly a central moment in Scrooge's quote conversion, because of course the story is very much about the conversion of a man, and that conversion comes significantly through going back, remembering, kind of experiencing again the influence, the love, the direction, the authority, the example of a man from the past. So you might say, well, you never know how someone's going to turn out, and that's true. And gosh, Scrooge went so wrong even after having been Fezziwig's apprentice. But now, it comes around again.
Yeah, it's like the seed that has been planted that makes it possible for Scrooge to be moved to convert.
Yeah.
So it's even though Scrooge goes bad after Fezziwig's influence, it's never wasted because the seed has been planted and provides kind of a place to which Scrooge can go back.
And which, by the way, just to give you a teaser to push you to all the more to go and read the rest, the next scene, the next kind of stage in Of Christmas Past is going to then Scrooge a few years later when he's engaged to a young lady. And it's kind of the key moment in your seeing after kind of a difficult childhood, but then this great experience with Fezziwig. Here he's engaged, and in short, you see this is kind of right where the kind of tipping of the balance. He could have gone either way. He could have invested in this marriage or the person he was engaged to, but you see that greed, that kind of selfishness, is taking root in his heart, and what kind of it's very realistically presented. And you might think in many ways this is a story of stark portraits. And one might think at the beginning, well, is anyone as bad as Scrooge is? It's actually very subtly done as regards what brings a man to be like that. And I dare say there's much for us to discover, and I think even recognize in ourselves, even if not in such a stark way as we find it in Scrooge.
Yeah, and so therefore, actually, it's a little more challenging. Maybe when it's starker, it's easier to accuse ourselves and change. Maybe there are more subtle ways that we're unlike Fezziwig. I'll put it that way.
So you're saying it's more of a challenge. It can be harder for us. It's like Scrooge. It's going to be easier for it to be pointed out to Scrooge, and for Scrooge to realize,
and for us to see
the disorder.
Yeah.
but we're going to have to look very carefully at ourselves
Mhm.
in order to see.
And if Fezziwig is kind of the model, I think it's good to look at Fezziwig and say, well, what is it about Fezziwig that makes him be the antithesis to Scrooge's closeness, his,
Yes. Yeah.
stinginess, his not just stinginess in as regards money, but also his heart and his affections.
Yeah.
So what is it? I just love the line that it says that in little things that could not be counted up, that one could not count up, the little things that he did that created joy for those that were under him. And so, but I think we can talk a little bit. Well, what is it
Yes,
that Fezziwig
right.
did that made him do? Because it is only a few pounds, and he didn't have a castle, and he didn't have some extraordinary ballroom. He just washed the floors of his warehouse. So, what is it that made Fezziwig have the power to bring such joy?
Yes. Well,
Just so many different. I love the list of the people who come. It's not just those who are immediately under him. It's just, I almost feel like I want to read that list again, because like the people included in it is just so, tells you so much about who Fezziwig is, that these, the boy who it was suspected that he did not have enough for his board. In
came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board, of course, means food, right? Mm-hmm. Room and board. And who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door, but one who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. But clearly it's being said, Fezziwig has his eye out for, he's concerned that this boy over the way is not being fed enough.
And so Christmas provides an excuse for him to feed him some more.
Yes.
And so it's very, I think it's very clear, even though there are people who don't belong to Fezziwig who are coming, everyone who's there is invited. Mm-hmm. Even those who come shyly, mm-hmm. It's, it's clear it's not a revolving door. People have become, so that means Fezziwig has seen them and invited them, and he sees something of their condition and of their heart that he's trying to assuage and meet their needs through this ball that's just in his warehouse.
And something I want to talk more about is, it seems to come so naturally to him. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's almost the way that the character is painted, it feels almost as though he would have appeared to be unaware. Mm-hmm. I mean, a little bit in his own zone. Yeah. This man that's kind of kind of bouncing,
super
bouncing
jolly,
around.
high energy. Yeah,
but clearly, Fezziwig has an eye for the little things. I mean, who was suspected of not having board enough from his master. In other words, Fezziwig and his wife suspected. I mean, that means they're watching. Mm-hmm. They have an eye for these things. Remember the moment that the clock had pointed to the 7, boom, he rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over. He's been looking forward to this moment. He's ready to go. Mm-hmm. This is so.
And how he speaks to his apprentices right away. He knows what it will mean to them.
Yo ho there, Ebenezer, Dick. Yo ho, my boys. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. I mean, his very spirit it clearly animates.
And I have to point out that the boys' alacrity and putting up the shutters, they get them done before you could say 12. I think that also shows how when a person is seen by the person in authority, when the person in authority gives a command or asks them to do something, those on the receiving end of the command go with alacrity because they feel they're being seen by the person in authority.
I think that's a great point.
So I just like the response of the young men is clearly illustrative of the kind of man he is, long before we hear how they set up the hall, how they feed the people, who's invited, who's in. You can already tell that there is a relationship that they trust the man in authority over them to be seeing them, which is why he has power to bring them great joy.
Well, which brings out, remember, it's called, at one point it says this domestic, of course from the word for home, this domestic ball. Mm-hmm. This is an exercise of a household right here.
Mm-hmm.
This is a husband and a wife bringing their love
And care.
to be embodied in a very concrete, physical way for many. So this whole and so I think we really have here an exceedingly powerful image of the power of a good marriage,
Mm-hmm.
of a good home, to make people happy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Dickens is such a master. I mean, just consider again the way that it is rounded off here, that it's all brought to a close by the Spirit. The Spirit is a great teacher. The great teacher. The Spirit doesn't note how much I learned.
Socrates.
It's like Socrates.
Mm-hmm.
He asked the right question. What is it not a small matter? Is that so much that he deserves this praise? That the Spirit just asks the question,
Mm-hmm.
and it moves Scrooge to come forth and give this reflection, which I want to read again. It isn't that, said Scrooge. That is good. He has spent but a few pounds, says the Spirit, of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise? Here Scrooge already is having this conversion, this insight. No, he's being shown life. This is moments like this that people are brought to the deeper insight. No, it's not about money. How could you say such a thing?
Yeah,
it was
he's
only
offended.
3 or 4 pounds. Immediately, this is Scrooge saying, "What? This is not about money."
Yeah.
I mean, afterwards he almost must have kind of caught himself, but
Well, he does.
But yeah,
when the ghost looks at him.
But it isn't that, said Scrooge, heated by the remark and speaking unconsciously, like his former, not his latter self. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, later on, he's lost this insight. He's lost these inclinations. Goes on. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy. I think you're absolutely right, dear. That must be that's perhaps the central line of this entire story. In any case, focusing us on the power in a home of spouses, the power of someone who is like Fezziwig, a man of character, and Mrs. Fezziwig, that what they can do in their generosity, that their very kindness is generosity. That great, powerful word that your father loved so much, of it has that meaning of generating, bringing something new. You bring about something new precisely in your being generous. Look what the generosity of the Fezziwigs does in bringing about life. And let me read on. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service, and all life is always some kind of service, light or burdensome, or pleasure or toil. Say that his power, and again, this is Scrooge speaking to the Spirit, say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. Can you really give? Can spouses give happiness? Can a household be run in such a way that it gives happiness? This is a very good philosophical issue. That's not, these words are important. Does it just give happiness? In what sense?
Yeah. So I the thing that struck me when you were reading this is that he says he had the power to render us happy or unhappy. And so I guess my question is, okay, if we're thinking about a master, someone who's in authority, it's kind of obvious. We can think of the kind of things a master can do to make a person unhappy, because we have the example of it at Scrooge at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
He can drive you. He can require more of you than is just. He can not give you what you need to do your job. He can criticize you for what you're doing. That would make you unhappy. But what is it that he gives that makes you happy? And Scrooge tells you it's not good pay, because he says, this isn't about the money. So it's not good pay. It's not just hours, although obviously that would be part of what a good master does. And so it kind of makes you ask, what is the nature of the authority that it can confer that kind of happiness.
Yes.
Like it
Yes.
seems that the authority, it's not, I think what it's saying is authority is not simply the power to boss someone around.
Mm-hmm.
That authority must be something that is more intrinsically connected. So why does one man have authority over another? What are the relationships that justify it? In the sense of in the household, that relationship is very intimate and very kind of close to the essence of who people are. And that's why the sadness is more profound than just not having enough to eat, not being warm enough in the office, working long hours. The sadness is much greater in the same way that the joy is much greater. So I think you're getting a sense that Fezziwig, the happiness that Fezziwig is conferring is much more than just enough coal on the fire, fair hours.
Right.
It's something more, and it's specifically connected to the fact that he has authority over them. Like there's already a relationship that's happened between Fezziwig and those under him that gives him the power to confer something deeper than just physical comfort.
And how did I that's boy, that leads us into questions that are not going to be explicitly answered here, and that are difficult to answer, but it's worth our time just to turn it around in our minds, to ponder these things, hold them in our heart, and keep asking, at least, what is human happiness? Why is Fezziwig clearly himself a happy man? What makes that be so? And what one of the lines that's so interesting here is his power lies in words and looks. I love how that focuses on these simple things of all the little words are significant. The looks that you give are significant. But still, though, it doesn't say, there's something being conveyed. What is it that is being conveyed in those words and looks? We should ask and look again at a great sketch like this and try to feel. You can feel in his words and his looks something is hilly ho. This and even in those, I love reading them out loud, and the people listening tend to laugh.
Yeah.
When I say that, yo ho there, Ebenezer and Dick. But there's a spirit that's being conveyed by yo ho there.
Well, I'm just thinking about it with you right now. This is very interesting. And we've talked about it a little bit, but this is, we've never really talked about this part. But when you talk about authority in the home, when you talk about what a man and woman are embarking on when they say yes to one another, it's their responsibility is look toward the good of those who are in their household. And that good is so much more than just physical good. Yes, it includes that, but it's much greater. So if we really look to the flourishing of all the members of our household, we're noticing all kinds of things. There's so many things that go into that. So if that's the nature of real authority, looking to the good of those under you and their flourishing, then that Fezziwig uses words and looks. So the looks can be in the sense of his expressions, but maybe it's also his gaze, that he uses his penetration to see what those under him need for their flourishing. And I wonder if it's that gaze, and his words, of course, express that. His commands express what he sees with the eyes of authority. I'm responsible for the flourishing of these people.
Yeah.
And so those under him feel he has seen me.
Absolutely.
And he's choosing everything and orchestrating everything so that I can flourish. Even the things that sometimes are hard or restrictive or whatever. But what the person under someone in authentic authority experiences when it's exercised well is the look. The look has penetrated to see, what do I need, and is orchestrating everything for my flourishing.
I think that's a great way of putting it. That's what the center of reality is. That's the way God looks at us. And that's the way we all, and according to our own station in life, are called to look at and toward others.
Mm-hmm.
And that is human happiness.
Yeah.
In giving that look and in being the object of that look is happiness.
And it's so amazing because you said that's how God looks at us. And so in this instance, Fezziwig is the conduit of Scrooge's conversion, which is ultimately, everyone senses at the end of the short story, his conversion is unto turning his heart toward God and a Christian life, right?
Absolutely.
So Scrooge turns his heart back toward God because Fezziwig has mirrored the authority of God, the genuine authority of God, which is looking toward our flourishing and genuine happiness.
And we talk about the virtue of domestic prudence that can sound a bit bone dry, but is this beautiful virtue that spouses cultivate together of overseeing and giving order to everything in their relationship, the relationship with their children, and all the ways that that's incarnated and takes place in a daily way in this amazing thing called household. This is the way he is. I mean, how about this beautiful image of when the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door. Can you imagine?
Taking up their responsibility.
I mean, how often do we see something like this? Yeah. They are very aware, intentional, engaged. Think how every person now knows we were invited by them. We've been taken care of by them and welcomed in by them. We are now going to be sent forth by them. It's like the perfect final touch.
Yeah.
What a beautiful
it's incredible
view of hospitality.
Yeah. And also Fezziwig and his wife they accept the burden of being the hosts, or the burden of authority is there's something required of me that, maybe isn't comfortable sometimes, or I'm tired already and I have to say bye to everybody at the door. No, they to the end carry the burden, which is a beautiful burden, of course. And for them, it's joyful.
To them, yeah.
Yes. But I mean, it's a beautiful witness of what does authority mean? That authority is to the last a service. At 11 o'clock, after all of that, they're standing at the door, and finishing their service.
And they've
that's
just
the
been
whole point.
Dancing with his calves kind of shining like moons and flash them around.
Could you just, when I said, when we finished reading this the other night, when I said everybody in authority should read this, kind of what I was thinking when I said authority is like literally everyone in authority. There are all kinds of ways in which we find ourselves in authority over someone, maybe definitely lowercase a, a teacher in a classroom.
Boss,
your friend asks you to watch her children for, there's a certain sense in which we assume a kind of authority in a particular situation. It might be a temporary authority. It might be a limited authority, but literally anytime you are in authority over someone, we should be a Fezziwig. And so I just have this overwhelming feeling of like, this is not about dads. This is not about, it's like everyone in some way or another is going to find themselves in a position of authority, even if it's temporary or borrowed or, and yet as soon as we're in that position of authority, that's the relationship that we should have toward the person who has been put under us. Could you just read that, the description of Mrs. Fezziwig? It is just the most amazing description
very brief.
of conjugal unity that this is Fezziwig's spirit is what is being described here. Fezziwig is the one who kind of quote unquote has the power too. And yet it's not just that she's his helpmate and does the work with him. And of course, sets up all the food. No, she actually shares his spirit. And that's why the praise that Dickens gives her, the words that he gives her, is that the praise to Fezziwig is equally justly applied to his wife because she's fully entered into the responsibility that they've taken upon themselves in their marriage and in their household, and by extension, his businesses, his apprentices. But read those. I just love those words, the description of her.
So just then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple too, with a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who are not to be trifled with, people who would dance. Would is actually italicized in the text. People who would dance and had no notion of walking. I have to read that to the people when next time we're running a dance. I love it. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, her is italicized. As to her, it's 2 sentences. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. Surely, in other words, every sense of the term, partner.
Yeah.
And I mean, in other words, she's a good dancer. She's going to do just fine out there. But of course, in that great turn of phrase, it says everything we'd want to know about their marriage, about the kind of person she is, just like him, because they've forged this way of living together. They are partners in life. Followed by the sentence, if that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it.
Amazing. It's just amazing.
and then never says a word about her individually again. So after that, all the praise that's given to Fezziwig
is clearly
all
to her
hers too. But so again, can I just give you them when they're saying goodnight to people? Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them. But I give you the image of each of those 2 looking in the eye every person. You talked about being seen. I mean that's the physical expression of kind of looking in the eyes. We're so glad that you were here,
and we wish you a Merry Christmas.
And they mean it.
Yeah.
And they're wishing something specific. The very spirit that they've been showing that has animated them. There's something so beautiful. We have saints to whom to imitate, and thank God we do. I sometimes to have something that's a little closer to home. Someone might say, well, still Fezziwig and Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig seem kind of out there. I mean, really? I say to myself, this is something that we can strive for. And
I would just say, we should all strive to be that kind of host and hostess at some point. We should not get distracted by the accidentals, which is having a room that was big enough to have a ball, putting on a ball. Well, I don't know how to conjure hands. How could I have a ball? No, it's not about that. It's about seeing people. And do the people who you've been given to you for your care, who are under your care, whether it's for the evening at a party you have, or your children, or your extended family, do they feel your careful gaze? And so it doesn't matter
even
what
if you're
you do in your home
of one.
Yes.
And you have guests comes. You're a priest in a parish.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different ways that this very particular Fezziwigian reality
can be ours.
Shows up.
Absolutely.
Shows up.
And even down to you're checking out at the grocery store, how you look at the person who checks you out.
Wonder how Fezziwig would have gone through the line at Martin's.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you.
We should move towards wrapping up, but just something that struck me. I could be a little bit discouraged, and it just seems to come so naturally to Fezziwig. I mean, just like did it come out of the womb this way? And for me to be this way, I'm going to have to be so intentional. And so I was thinking about that. It struck me that the more you develop the kind of art. I mean, this is the art of living. This is the art of hospitality. That has more specific the art of hospitality, the art of treating those under you well. These are all very important parts of this art of life. The more you develop an art, any art, the more natural it seems. A great athlete has developed the art because there's an art of whatever the particular sport is in question. but it seems so natural when they
And
do that.
effortless. Yeah.
And Aristotle says habits are kind of second nature. There's so much richness in that. Art is a kind of habit. It's a know-how, so it becomes natural to you. Intentionality. We have to be very intentional in forming these arts. Always behind something that has become natural, there was always an intentionality behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes someone else's intentionality, as well as our own intentionality. So in our day and age, to do something like what Fezziwig and the Fezziwigs are doing here, the Fezziwigian reality, is going to take our being intentional.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be heartened. Maybe it will be our children in whom this way of living, this way of being, this way of acting will become more natural to them, where it doesn't require as much intentionality or kind of casting about trying to figure out what are we going to do, where are we going to do it, how are we going to incarnate this in our home. Those of us who are being intentional in our homes, our intentionality might be the cause of happiness, cause of those we serve being able to do this more richly,
Sure.
more naturally. It's more their own. This is something we can give them. They're still going to have to freely receive it.
Mm-hmm.
So you never cause happiness in the proper sense of in the sense of just I do this, therefore someone else is happy.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a real cause without being the total cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm never the total cause of someone's happiness. I can be a real cause of someone's happiness. And isn't this in many ways what our life is about? The Lord is always, God is always the cause of happiness. This is the only thing he's interested in causing when God goes to create. He's creating so that he can cause happiness, because happiness is what he does and he wants to share it. He makes us able to do that. And let's have the joy of learning a little something from the Fezziwigs about how to do so.
I just want to add one
Please.
thing to that, in making the spirit of right authority be something that's natural for us. Of course, like you say, it has to start an intention. But the party that the Fezziwigs put on is kind of a product or most kind of glorious and joyful manifestation of what is in fact a daily choice. So if he were not the kind of man that saw people's needs on the daily basis and that his words express that, the big party he put on, even if everything was identical, all the details were identical, would not have had the effect of causing that joy in the people who attended there. Mm-hmm. The party is the culmination of the choices of daily life to see and to serve and to have that relationship. And so, again, we shouldn't get overly concerned about how do I throw that kind of party and have it seem natural? Well, we just have to do it a lot and then it will become natural for joy. It's not the party. The party is the celebration of the daily life.
And it's not just repetition either. It's not just doing it again, and we have to keep trying to transform ourselves interiorly. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. But
no, definitely. I mean, that's part of it. And I think that's why it's beautiful that it's both Fezziwig and his wife, because it makes me think, what kind of conversations are they having at night when they're going to bed? Mm-hmm. What kind of things are they talking about? For her to be so much like him in his spirit of the good master, they have to be practicing that in their relationship with one another. Indeed. How does she know to be just like him?
And indeed,
they live that way.
To what extent has he learned that from her?
Exactly. They first live it in their life together. Then it extends in circles to those who are given to them. And then finally to the once a year celebration of the Christmas feast on Christmas Eve.
Amen.
So I just think it's beautiful to think of every day, every dish, every dinner, every good night to your children.
Mm-hmm. The words and the looks
is vested with those things. And the more we choose it, the more it becomes second nature.
Well, when I hear the word Fezziwig, I'm never going to, it's going to bring good Good thoughts to mind.
Yeah.
Dickens is amazing in his characters, and Fezziwig is one for the ages. So, Lord, grant
Absolutely.
us the grace to be a little more Fezziwigian in our marriages, in our relationships with whomever we relate to, in our homes.
I have this feeling reading this, like I did about so many other good pieces of literature I read as a child. Oh, I hope I meet Fezziwig in heaven. I can't wait to meet him in heaven. And surely there are Fezziwigs in heaven.
There's got to be one. Even better. Even better. I'm not sure he'll have calves that shine like moons, but
yeah.
maybe he will.
Maybe
He will. Dear, thanks for the conversation. Glad you all could join us. Look forward to next time. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.